Yellowstone season 2, episodes 7 and 8 are over, but we're just getting started over here at Post Show Recaps. Hello, my friends. It is I, DM Philly, Rich Filiberto, hanging out with you again one more week talking about Yellowstone. I, of course, am not alone. I am joined by a woman who often leaves me saying, "Hardy har har." It's the great Grace Leader. Grace, how are you?
I'm good. I was just wondering if I could have a horse. Can I have
Yeah,
one?
I would
Can't
definitely
really
get you
be a
a horse.
cowboy if I don't have a horse.
I cannot train the horse for you. You're
Oh,
gonna have to get your dad, Taylor Sheridan, to
my
come to.
dad, Taylor Sheridan, will
Yeah,
definitely take care
yeah.
of the horse. Yeah.
I
Okay.
will
Great.
move on to Taylor Sheridan's ranch with you to
Okay.
oversee the trading of the horse if you'd like.
Okay. Great. 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 Great.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Grace, episode 7 and 8, Resurrection Day, and
Mm-hmm.
behind us only gray. Some big episodes as we're closing out season 2. How'd you feel about them?
I like them. I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. I mean, I don't like that this happened, but the scene where Beth is beaten up is quite intense, which then leads to the scene that I quite like, which is, of course, Dan Jenkins, Thomas Rainwater, and John Dutton, aka Kevin Costner, talking and the like secretly being recorded, and all of that is like very fun. I feel like it's like setting up for a very fun final 2 episodes, which we'll watch next week, as that's what CBS has on the schedule. 2 episodes again.
I am ready for it. Another 2 episodes. Yeah, it's really interesting. We talked a bit last week about violence and the violence against women and the way that it's
Yes.
depicted on this show. This is a really brutal episode. I'm generally a bit jaded when it comes to violence in media. It's not a thing that typically upsets or perturbs me in any kind of grievous way. But I remember seeing this the first time and being like, okay, this is a bit gratuitous. It's like they are going up very hard. It gets brutal. They really F Beth up. I remember coming away from it like, doesn't this woman need like reconstructive surgery? Like, that seems like a
Uh-huh.
real beating, but it's chilling. And I think it does set us up with incredible momentum coming out of it towards these final episodes. The sit down that we get in episode 8 between those three guys, it's fantastic. I mean, that's the
Really good.
scene we've been driving towards since episode 1 of Yellowstone. And I think it is really satisfying when we get there.
It's very good. Him being like, you don't need to record me. Like, I'll do it. It's great. It's really good. Yeah.
It's a very fun setup. It's a really cool sit down.
The thing I
Yeah,
think about, just to step in, and I'm not trying to like defend, because I do think like I do have problems. I joked. I was like 2 weeks ago. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so good!" And then I was reading online just to make sure that like I was in the right place. And they're like, "Oh yeah,
sure.
violence against women is like, yeah, it's a pretty prominent theme here." And I was like, "Okay." And then immediately comes up where Sarah Naguin is killed. I do think there's a big difference between in the storytelling world, where like Beth is so involved in what's happening to the degree that like I'm not like as obviously I think like violence against women, but like Jamie's is like, this is a person that he was in a relationship with, and there's
Mhm.
lots of like problematic ways about that and what happened, and how she's like a journalist. There's this world, I think, in like, almost like in the pro wrestling world, where it's like, if you're in it, you're in it, right? And so like
Yeah.
these stories of this with Beth, I'm less inclined to feel like I want to as much put it in the bucket, even if it's maybe not great, and it could be triggering for people. I don't think it's quite the same as like as even the Sarah and Jamie stuff we got from the previous episode. So not to like
%. Yeah.
dismiss that there is this theme happening in the show, but I want to just like acknowledge that piece. Yeah.
No, I'm a million percent with you. I think that part of what I was trying to articulate last time about Sarah, and I don't know how effectively I did it, is just that she's a character who's so distinctly othered from the main cast.
Yes.
It's so about her being different, and here's this lesbian, and she's a journalist, and she's an outsider, and she wants to expose all these things, and there's no real depth to the story, right?
Right.
Sarah's depth is very much about motivating Jamie's story, driving Jamie's story forward. It's not quite fridging on that level, but it's certainly a very kind of a typical and maybe not ideal use of like violence against women to further the story of one of your male leads. Whereas Beth is like an active agent of chaos who is very much a player in this ensemble. And while this is not directly like a repercussion for any of her explicit actions, it is very much about the fact that she's one of the Duttons, and it's about her story, and we're going to explore the impact on her as a character, right? It's not just just about the way that it's going to catalyze everybody around her. So I think there's a really meaningful distinction. And look, like content warnings, like mileage may
Yeah.
vary for people, but this kind of violence, I think, is the kind of thing that like it's helpful for a lot of people to know this is going to be part of the hour of TV they're sitting down for. It really is very visceral attack that we
So
get to by the end.
one thing I'll say it's really interesting is like I think there was a lot of so we typically, although today we are recording on Monday, we typically record on Sundays and we
Yes.
just watch the episodes as we have them available on streaming services. I got really annoyed, Rich, that they moved, and I get that this makes a lot of sense, but Yellowstone was on Amazon Prime Video here for a while, and then it got moved
Yes.
back to Paramount Plus, which I had to then
Yes.
acquire. So I'm just like, the bouncing around of streaming shows is so annoying, but whatever. Like, why'd you sell it to Amazon Prime? It's like you literally Paramount Plus, but that's fine. Whatever. I'm not actually mad. And then but I watched them on there, and there was this talk like one of the things that's like we're not really doing in terms of this like CBS watch is like actually like recording it on CBS to then like see what aired and what didn't. And the part of that is
Yes.
like it's a little bit too much work because I've never seen the show before. I can't tell you like what
The
did or did not
distinction.
make it.
Yes.
So it's like hasn't been worth the effort, and it makes sense for us to be able to record on Sundays so we can get the pod out on Mondays. This was the time where I was like, oh yeah, like I wonder how this got like I don't think
Me
you can
too.
though edit around this. Like you can't really, but it
Nope.
is such a like this is a hard thing to like imagine even like 15 years ago makes it onto a prime time like a network show, but seemingly it did. I have not watched the edit, but I presume it did. Yeah.
I am with you, and I had the same kind of question. I'm glad that you pointed it out, right? Because we're trying to make sure that we're able to get these out on time and early. And Yellowstone's a show that I have on physical media for all intents and purposes. I don't have to go hunting it down on streaming services, which is very convenient in the age 2023. So I was quite curious as to like what might have gotten lost in translation. I'd love to hear from anybody who's
Yes,
watching on
same.
the NBC version, because part of it for me is Yellowstone, even though it's a show I've watched a bunch of times, I'm not necessarily microscope watching where I could tell you like I could with like the Lord of the Rings extended editions. Well, actually, Grace, this was not in the original edition. I won't know necessarily what gets changed. So I appreciate going back and watching the original formats for whatever it's worth. Uh,
Apparently there are like it does need to be edited to fit like a TV 14
I
rating, but
believe that. Yeah.
I I don't know exactly the minute details about how this is
The
changing. So, yeah.
the metrics of like ratings and all this kind of stuff, it really comes down to like seconds, right? Of like how much you're showing for how long and the depictions of things. There's something coming up in an episode that I really want to point out because of how quick it is while it is included. But nonetheless, we're here today to talk about episode 7 and 8, Resurrection Day, Behind Us Only, Gray. Of course, we're breaking it down every week. You guys can subscribe. You can catch all the Yellowstone coverage. postshowrecaps.com/Yellowstone is the RSS feed you can subscribe to. Yes.
I was just going to flag that we were talking about this before, that currently, as of the day that we're recording this, which is November 27th,
Mhm.
there is nothing on the schedule for Yellowstone after this. So
Yep.
I know that season 5 has resumed filming. Did you know that there's another 2 prequels slash sequels that have been there's a show called 2024 coming, Rich? I don't know if you saw that.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I believe that's right. That maybe that's the Matthew McConaughey show. I actually don't know. But
That's got to be a placeholder, right? I'm really curious about the Matthew McConaughey show, but 2024, that is not before Yellowstone. That does not fit the preconceived
well,
narrative structure, Grace.
I don't know. Anyway, yeah, spin-offs 1944 and 2024 have been ordered as of 3 weeks ago. So we even missed this. Anyway, all I'm going to say is that currently CBS has not said that they're going to continue to air Yellowstone. But last time what happened between 1 and 2 was that this upcoming week, like as the week like between the last episodes and the penultimate episode and the finale, they then announced, hey, we're going to air season 2. So we
Mhm.
might be getting that this week where they're going to do it and then they'll reshuffle the schedule. Currently, I believe there's like a Grammy special that's being slotted in
Oh,
for the
sure.
week after season 2 finishes. If it does, if season 3 does get announced and it's going to air, we'll be here. If it's not, we will determine what our schedule looks like moving forward. But just a scheduling note for folks on that front, because they have not officially announced that they are airing more than just these two seasons at the moment.
Excellent heads up. I appreciate it. That is probably all the more reason you should subscribe.
Yes.
Postshowrecaps.com/Yellowstone, because that way you will get whatever coverage we have coming back at you as soon as we resume the coverage. The 1944 prequel does not surprise me. I mean, we're following the structure of like 1883, 1923. What did you just say? 1944?
1944, yeah.
Oh, we got
1944.
away from the threes. That's interesting.
And then 2024, though, is apparently what's coming after Yellowstone, is what people predict. So, like, Yellowstone will end, and then a new show called 2024 will start airing.
That's a terrible name, Taylor. Get in touch with your dad and tell him. The prequel names, like, I get it. It's an
Uh-huh.
interesting convention, and at least you're able to follow a format that is very simple and really easy to root us in. Wait, when is this show set? Oh, 1944. Right?
Uh-huh.
It's kind of like a dark. What year is it? 1944.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's wise. But you can't name a show 2024 and release it in 2024 and think that that's a good move. That's a
Well,
bad move.
it's likely not airing in 2024. It's likely
Oh
airing
my
in
God, that's
20
an even worse
it's
move.
likely airing in 2025 or beyond, because the final Yellowstone episodes are pushed back to November 2024. So they're not coming out for basically another year.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really interesting. These final
Yeah.
Yellowstone episodes are so fascinating. I look forward to us closing in on it a little bit more because we can start to talk about the kind of dynamic of the Sheridan interconnected cinematic universe here
Yeah.
and where we found ourselves. But like I said, I'm a big fan of 1883. I thought it was really good. 1923, not quite as sharp, but I really did like it. It's a strong period show for whatever it's worth. You got a couple of very fun performances in there. I dug it. I'm curious to see where the coverage will go. Nonetheless, we're here today to talk about episodes 8 and 7 of season 2. I got some short, long recaps. I will break it down and then we
Do
can
it.
dive into it, Grace.
Sounds good.
Okay, episode 7, Resurrection Day. Casey finds John about to take a ride and says that he'll join him, noting that he will follow. John just needs to tell him what direction he's going. The metaphor of the moment is not subtle. Jamie, meanwhile, is still struggling badly with what he did, and Beth doubles down, tormenting him about it. The Beck brothers' intimidation campaign is ramping up as they kill a man who works at the casino site to send Thomas a message and show up at Beth's office to threaten her. Tate, meanwhile, is working on convincing John he needs a horse. John's willing, as is Casey. And once Casey brings Tate home, Monica affirms that she doesn't want to be without her husband anymore. And the pair are able to rekindle their relationship. John, ultimately back on the ranch, realizes a gun is missing from the cabinet. And he finds Jamie alone in one of the fields, dangerously close to taking his own life. He manages to talk him down, and Rip ultimately will bring Jamie to the bunkhouse where he's going to start working as one of the ranchers. Monica agrees to move back to the ranch with Tate and Casey, and the trio try to settle in, though the rooms in the house are just a bit too big. John moves into Lee's old cabin, which is a very emotional moment for the man as he's packing his clothes away side by side with his late sons. And as Beth and her assistant Jason are working late, a pair of masked intruders break into the office and assault them. Beth puts up a good fight, stabbing one repeatedly. She's defiant and refuses to give them the satisfaction of her being scared. So they kill Jason to try to let the message sink in. Rip shows up just in the nick of time and kills both men. Casey ultimately comes home to Monica that night and admits that he's had to do some dark work. And Malcolm Beck will find both men hung up in front of his office the next morning with a note that says, "Return to sender." And as Casey finds John and asks what they're going to do, John simply explains, "We're going to kill him, son." Episode 8, we pick up as Casey and Jamie are having a conversation about Jamie's new role as low man among the ranchers. Jamie asks if Casey can forgive him for what he's done, and Casey simply says they're brothers, asserting that says all it needs to. Beth, meanwhile, is nursing her brutal wounds as Rip sleeps in her bed. She orders a breakfast of ice cream and vodka as Monica watches on, clearly concerned at having just moved her family onto the ranch. Thomas and Nan arrive at the Yellowstone to have their sit down with John. The pair both see Beth, and they disclose what the Beck brothers have done to intimidate them. All three men agree that while they've been fighting amongst one another, they've at least had enough honor not to take the fight to one another's families. Dan wants John to say that he wants to kill the Beck brothers out loud, and John discovers that he has a recorder. Dan takes it and clearly states into the microphone that he thinks they should kill the Becks, implicating himself. Thomas then takes it, saying that this is like a blood oath amongst the three of them, and explains that as a tribal chief, he's caught, for all his native people will suffer for his actions if he gets caught. John refuses to say it on tape, asserting that he doesn't have to because he's the one who's going to do the dirty work. And with that, the three enemies are in bed with one another. Malcolm, meanwhile, has a meltdown at the failed attack on Beth and tells his brother they need to kill what John loves most. Monica's expressing her concern about life on the ranch to Casey before she heads out with her class to see some Native American rappers performing. When she returns, Casey very insightfully says that they can't fall back into their old patterns of hiding their feelings from one another. And she admits that she doesn't think that they can stay here on the ranch, with Casey agreeing that he'll move to town with her if it's going to make her happy. Jimmy, meanwhile, is able to pay off his old debts with his rodeo money, but the dirtbags say that he owes another $1,000 for Avery having bear sprayed them, and they take his rodeo belt buckle. John goes to talk with Monica about how pleased he is to see Casey training Tate's horse, and he manages to convince his daughter-in-law to stay a bit longer on the Yellowstone and give them a chance. Beth's feelings for Rip are clearly growing more profound, but he is pulling back from her. And as she watches him working with Tate, she's very touched. Moving away, she ultimately finds Jamie mucking out a stall, and in a very chilling confrontation, she tells him that someday she will destroy whatever it is that he comes to love, no matter the cost to herself. And John goes to find Casey late night as the pair go to pick up Jamie from the bunkhouse. They drive during the night in the car, and it's clear that Jamie's fears that they might be taking him to kill him. But they ultimately arrive at a crime scene where one of Thomas's men has been killed. Having realized that the Becks have their own plane and were the ones to poison the herd, John makes a call to set a meeting with them. And the intention is to kill them while the plane is flying over the ranch. As Malcolm Beck hangs up on the other end of the phone, we see photos of all of the Dutton family, and Malcolm shoves the photo of Tate towards his brother, repeating the line, who he loves most. That's episode 8 of season 2 of Yellowstone. There was a lot of stuff, Grace. We're getting into the drama.
There's a lot of stuff. Yeah, I thought it's really good though. I think that the way that everything is intertwined, and we're still clearly setting up some tension here between. I think a show like this, I think that while season 1 I thought didn't um sort of live up to the promise of John versus Thomas versus Dan or whatever. This one, it does feel like it's going to, head somewhere a little bit more conclusive. And I think that's probably like potentially a thing where the show realized that between Danny Houston as Dan Jenkins and Gil Birmingham as Thomas Rainwater, there's only so much you can do to conclude that story. I joke about the Dan being hanged thing and how he comes back alive. It does feel like this is setting us up for like a really clear this feels very like I don't know if it's like a perfect analogy, but Breaking Bad-ish, where like sometimes these seasons have these like, this is the enemy of this season. It does feel like season 2 is the story of John against the Beck brothers, and that and I think that the idea that they both know they're after each other, and John is ready to pull the trigger, and yet he doesn't realize that they have their sights set on the thing that he actually loves most, which is Tate. I do think is a fitting sort of cliffhanger here for what we're going to get, which is like a pair of final episodes that we're going to watch next week. So.
Yep, I think it's a really strong setup for our conclusion, right? I really love, this episode 7, Resurrection Day. I know you and I love to talk about this. Sometimes we always take it with a grain of salt. One of the highest rated episodes of the show, Great. It's got a 9.2 on IMDb. I think people find it riveting, which is interesting because it's episode 8 that we have the big sit down with these three, right? I think 7 is so much we're really focusing in on the family, and we zoom in on on the Duttons and their current state of affairs. I love the bookends of the way that it opens and the way that it closes, with Casey kind of saying to John, I'll catch up. You just got to tell me what direction we're going in. And
Right.
the closing shot of the episode of the two of them side by side, Casey's got like his fists balled, his shoulders slumped. It's a very almost childlike presentation as he stands next to his dad, the pair of them looking off into the sunset. But it's excellent setup. And I think to your point of the, the Danny Hudson, the Gil Birmingham, and all, these guys are so good. This trio, this like ensemble of these three sitting around in the chairs as they all lean into each other, Grace, like they match.
Yeah.
It's really compelling, and they're really all good actors in their own right. So I don't blame Yellowstone as much for like not dealing with them in season one. I can see the sentiment of like, God, we can't take these guys off the board.
It's
Even
kind of
if they
like,
were gonna kill
yeah,
Dan Jenkins, and they're like, no, you know what? We
yeah.
want that guy back.
Yeah, I mean, it's very like reminiscent that like, the Breaking Bad, that like Jesse was going to die at the end of season one. Supposedly Logan Roy was going to die at the end of season one of Succession. Like there's these moments where you build out the show and you think like, and this is
Jack
like,
on Lost. Yeah, there's a lot
yeah.
of them. Yep.
And like Taylor Sheridan, like I know he's had, like, it's hard to believe that this is not that long ago. And it is kind of that long ago, but also like he didn't really know exactly what, like Yellowstone is the breakthrough show for him. And
Yes.
so I think that like on one hand, there's this idea that you kind of maybe always want to build towards having more, but sometimes you might not realize that you have the opportunity to build to more until you're actually like doing it. I think like, I think that a lot of times we think like, oh my gosh, what a surprising success. I'm sure as they were like filming this, they were, they got Kevin Costner in their show. Like they know like this is not going to be nothing.
Yeah.
Just whether or not the quality is good. And I'm sure some execs were like, no, I think this is pretty good. I think we got something here that like we can turn in, and maybe that changes the course of the direction sometimes of the story of a first season, in a way that I would have liked them to put a little bit more like stakes to the end of season one and like paint themselves a bit into a corner in the way I think like sometimes Breaking Bad figured out how to,
Yes.
a lot of times it figured out how to do. But I do feel really confident that it feels like that's not where we're headed in season two. And I could be way wrong. It's just the feeling I get that the Beck brothers, I think they're really good villains. They also feel like they are much more expendable than
Sure.
both Dan and Thomas. So yeah, the thing you talked about with episode 7 being one of the highest rated of the show, I don't think that's surprising. I do think that to a degree, as much as I love and you love Dan and Thomas, that the like sort of heart of the show is like John and his kids.
It's the family.
Yeah, it's the family. So the episode that's much more like family centered, I think makes sense that it would resonate. And we're like, you and I are talking like earlier about like, I want more of the information on like the land laws, or I don't know that everybody, like I think my dad watching this show is like much more engaged, whether or not he hates or loves any of John's kids. I presume if I asked my dad, he probably hates them all, but even Casey, maybe, I don't know. I'd have to check.
I thought your dad loves them all. They're his darling.
Oh yeah. Well, I was gonna say my like my stepdad. I feel it's really disrespectful.
No, don't do that. No, we don't need to take it that far.
But I feel like that's where so much of the tension is, and where actually like as much fun as John is, like when he goes and he like chucks chairs at Dan, like that's fun. But like the real juice is like in the moment where he's sitting, like he takes his son to the spot where the son's mother and John's wife died, and they're having like contemplative discussions about like you'll never know what that loss is. Like I think I already know what that loss is. Like that is like the heart of the show. As much as I like the other stuff, it would make sense that I think episode 7 is probably the stronger episode out of the two. But I love them, but I like them both a lot, and I like where we end up.
Same. Yeah. My big takeaway coming out of it was just, God, I really liked episode 8 a lot. Not to discredit what 7 did. I think 7's excellent. I think for the first time, you have these terrific moments with John really going in deep with all three of the kids. I mean, obviously, Jamie's attempted suicide here. There's a really like chilling moment in the confrontation they have, and the way that it falls out of Beth like holding John to account. Tell me you love him. Tell me you love him the way that you love Casey, the way that you love me. This is brutal, Grace. It's so cold. It's so chilling. Because even the things that John is saying to Jamie, it's not, I love you. It's not, I'm sorry. He says, I shouldn't have sent you away to school. He doesn't say, I'm sorry. I didn't listen to you. He's like, you needed more time. I could give that to you now, right? All of this, it's weak. It's cowardly. It's selfish. I won't let you, it's control that he's like exerting over his son. And I think that, look, relationships are complex and fraught. And I don't have kids So I can't say that like, oh, you always are going to love them all the same. I really wonder
No,
what kind of weight
no.
parents feel as this falls on them all across the world out there. This is one of these like eternal questions that I find so fascinating, Grace, and so compelling as somebody on the outside of the parent bubble, that I think that like it's probably really hard for a lot of parents to talk about. Like,
I
I
mean,
don't
for
have
me,
any real great insight here. So I love that
okay,
we're exploring
yeah.
this idea,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I have 3 siblings, I have 3 brothers, and I think that, like, it's probably true that, like, my parents like, I don't think it's fair for me to, like, ask my parents, like, "Do you love me more than my siblings?" Because I don't think that's, like, a fair question to ask, but I also part of the reason it's not fair is that, like, it inevitably is true. I think that
Yes.
you do, and that doesn't mean you don't love one child, but there's ways in which, like, you have connections and interests with one of them that you don't have other ones. So, and I think it's your responsibility as a parent to there's a really good line in Euphoria actually about it's like about how a father and a son both hate each other and how it's kind of fair for the son to hate his father, but it's not fair for the father to hate his son.
Mhm.
And I think about that a lot, that I think like, I do think as much I don't think I think it's true that someone can love their children differently, while also acknowledging that, like, you hopefully you don't hate your children. You have to support your like, even that I don't know if I like
Really
fully believe with that,
fascinating.
but I know it's like a very complex thing, but I think inevitably, and it's not something that I think ever needs to like be explored unless, in these moments where it's like if someone's like literally being treated unfairly or whatever, then it's interesting to explore. In the world where like everything's fine, it's like I don't think it's worth me asking my mom like, "You love me more than my brothers?"
It's an
But
impossible thing.
yeah,
I mean, you bring a
uh,
great point up because of the truth that inevitably exists behind it. It's a really difficult question to present to somebody, and I think it's so fascinating because we're dealing in like unquantifiable metrics, like how what is the volume of love? I know we can I love you 3,000, and that's like
right.
the top of the scale, right? For RDJ.
And it can
But
change too, like, there's moments where my mom is so much happier with my brother than with me
yep.
in a moment, and then it can be reversed where it's like, when my brother like, when it's, like, time to cook for Thanksgiving dinner, I'm awful at it, so, like, I am not helpful, whereas my brother's, like, very helpful. That doesn't mean she loves me less in that moment, but it's like, she
Well,
might
yeah.
appreciate this thing about my brother, it's a skill set that I don't have, and then there'll be another time where, like, I have a skill, so it's all very complicated. Yeah,
I mean, that's the thing. Now we're getting into like the quantifiable actions and what is love and like transactional behavior and like
true.
appreciation is not the same. I just think it's so fascinating because there's clearly chemistry among people, and some people connect and some don't. And I know people who are so tight with their parents, and I'm sometimes envious of that. And I know people who have like really distant relationships with their parents that still would never suggest they don't love them or they aren't loved or any of this, but it's a really fraught dynamic. And I think that Costner plays it really well as he gives this daughter the look of like, why are you even saying this to me? You know what I mean? Don't make me say it in the same way that we're going to get in episode 8. Like he won't say it out loud. He doesn't say anything out loud, but it felt really powerful. The Jamie trajectory. I know that this is probably like not our favorite of the Dutton kids, but I like keep saying how much I love Wes Bentley. He's just such like a sad, broken man on this show, especially. And I like him like falling back to his roots. I think there's something really endearing about that scene where Rip takes him to the bunkhouse and he kind of falls
Mhm.
in to play cards with the boys and
Yeah.
gets this pair of kings. And it's the like he doesn't even I think there's something like there's a metaphor of like, as long as you're willing to sit down to play, you don't know what the deck is going to give you, right? Like what is today terrible might be magnificent tomorrow. Through the act of perseverance, you can find fresh starts for yourself in life. And no matter what terrible weight you have hanging on you from behind, there's always the possibility of tomorrow, right? I think there's something like really inspiring about that, but also Jamie's inability to even like execute on it. He's like, no, I'm not here to like win in this moment. I just want to be here. I need to like be here amidst this company. I thought it was pretty poignant and like a good little stinger on the Jamie story, as it were.
Yeah, I think this is the most interesting Jamie's been, which kind of is sad that it's like, but a lot of, shows about successful lawyers are not exactly normally my cup of tea. So this like down on his luck lawyer who comes back to be a cowboy is probably, more my jam. The one thing I think I struggled the most with on the show, it's really interesting. I was telling you before we started recording that I was chatting with somebody and I said I was watching Yellowstone, and this person had some pretty strong critiques of Beth, which I thought to a degree. They got into some spoiler. So they never explicitly said anything happens, but one of them is that like the intent behind the search was like Beth is really evil, and oftentimes like not a lot of like stuff actually happens to Beth, which is very ironic that then I sat down and watched the episode where Beth
And
gets
watch Beth like beaten within an inch of her life. Yeah.
yes. Yes. And so, but the one thing I'm mostly struggling with this show more than, the interesting thing I thought about Succession was there was so often this thing, and I'll try not here to spoil Succession. I don't think I'm going to, but there was often this like camaraderie about when they would realize like they were up against their father in many ways, and it was their father who was pitting them against each other. That was always very wisely interplay with the idea that any moment there was a moment to win their father's affection, they would turn on each other and they would betray each other in a way that I thought was so excellently done. Whereas I do feel like that's missing to a degree in the show. Like it's kind of hard to believe that like these three people like did literally lose one of their brothers, like and their mom. They're so mean to each other. Like less so Casey. It's mostly just Beth and Jamie.
Casey is not. Yeah, I just like contribute here. Like Casey, I think is like so not removed from this. I do think that the shadow of Lee does not weigh in the way that it needs to on the show. Like the dead son, John's the only one who seems to be deeply affected by the death of their brother. I think Casey is a really good guy, and I think that he's just got his head up his own ass a little bit. He's not like particularly jerked either. I think that Jamie is really self-indulgent and just like fixated on his own thing. So he's not like willfully hurtful to the others, except that he's just self-indulgent and doesn't consider the impact on the others. And Beth is the one who's really just like effing cruel to the rest of them, like all the time. Great. I don't mean to like interrupt or like debate the point, but like I'm with you where there's a level of like we get the scene with Casey and Jamie at the beginning of episode 8. Like, when's the last time these two talked to each other at all?
There's a really awesome scene in episode 1, and I know Beth is the one not included in this, but it's with Lee, Casey, and Jamie, where they take Kate out and they're in their camp. They're like roasting over a fire, and it's excellent. They like fished, I think, and then they like they're cooking the fish, and it's really really good in a way that I do feel like is missing in the interest of like drama all the time, and the interest of creating conflict between Jamie and Beth. It's fine for that to be there because like I know like I have a sibling who like can be really hard for us to get along sometimes. And so like it's not like we often have these like moments of camaraderie. But then I also maybe need to see a little bit more where this like came from and where it started from and why it keeps happening is the one piece of this Jamie Beth stuff that I need. If you're going to have it be that they're constantly at each other's throats and like literally trying to like destroy each other, I maybe need a little bit more, and maybe it's coming, but I need more of like, why is she doing this?
It's I think that you as a savvy TV viewer, you're honing in on like the question. Because again, I just have to push back a little bit that like they don't want to destroy each other. Beth wants to destroy Jamie. Like Jamie does not seem to have the vitriolic animosity towards his sister that she has towards him.
He literally said you can hate
exactly.
You need something to hate. Yeah. So.
Exactly. I mean, we've talked about it a bunch as like this really important line in that conflict in that moment they have. So Jamie has accepted that like for whatever reason, he is the whipping post for Beth's aggression. And Beth is even like saying to John at one point, you wanted me here to fight against everybody.
Yeah.
Like he's the one that you cannot trust. I know you want to believe him. I know you want to, but don't like even think for a second. I just can't. And we have no clarity there. I think that that's really insightful. And I think you're supposed to be certainly by the end, because Beth really goes like full Cersei Lannister here, Grace, of like someday you're going to be better and you're going to love something again. And if I have to kill it with my own own hands. I will to see you suffer. This is like absolute insane vitriol.
It's
After
fully
everything
evil.
that she's like been
Yeah.
through at this point, that she's directing all of her animosity. I mean, she was nearly raped. She's been brutalized. She's like developing these feelings for Rip. She's like out of sorts. Her assistant has been murdered, Grace.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Lest we forget. She watched Jason get his face shot off because of her family's drama. And she has decided this is like the best use of her time. This is the best place to displace her aggression. I think it's really insightful that you're like, what's going on? Like, what is the root of this? Why do I need to know this? And like, we'll see if we ever get any clarity on that, I guess.
Yeah. We'll see. We shall see.
I just wanted to like stop in and talk about that because that dysfunction I think is really interesting. The other side of it of like Casey, you know, the Casey Monica story is something we've talked about a lot. That's really compelling for you. And now we have Monica, like, you know, all season has kind of been flirting with this, like, will she, won't she, with the physical therapist. Finally, she doubles down and is like, look, you're a part of me, Casey. You're a part of my soul. I don't want to be apart from you. She moves to the ranch only to immediately be like, we need to move off the ranch. This is really bad. Casey at this point is like fully in the deep end of the pool, where in season 1, he was like helping his dad, reconnecting with his dad. Now he's like out here straight up doing murders. Grace, like getting ready to do some killing, to be like major Machiavellian plotting. Monica is clearly aware of it. The whole reaction of Monica seeing Beth come to the breakfast table and like Beth consistently breaking every family eating event that they have. This is all really interesting to me. I was curious how it landed for you.
Yeah, it's okay. I don't mind where we are. I don't know if how we got here is the strongest writing of the show.
She
I
just like flips a switch and is like, actually, I want you back.
Yeah. Yeah, like Casey doesn't have to prove anything. There's a couple lines in here. So first of all, really love when Beth is like, "We're not supposed to talk about business," and John says, "Actually, it's breakfast, so we're allowed to talk about breakfast. Just dinner. We're not allowed to talk business," which is very funny. And then
Quite good. Yeah.
I really liked Beth's line to Monica about like, you know, something along the lines of like, stop complaining about the things that are like protecting you. Like you've moved into that house, like you're
Yeah.
benefiting off of this stuff, you know?
She's like, don't judge us too harsh for protecting what you're going to inherit. Like,
Right.
you're going to get this someday. We're just trying to
Well, she
keep it.
gets it. She moves into like they move into John's room, right? Like his bed, right? That's
Yep. That
yeah,
is John's bedroom. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I like where we are. I liked it at the beginning. I do like that there's the potential that this, you know, part of me. So now that Monica has this job, she's a professor, and you know she is trying to teach about like the inequality that's the, you know, and the racism and the oppression that's happened to her people, and then being like sort of part of this, like, you know, the ranch. I think is potentially interesting. I think there's like room to move there. So yeah, I like where we've ended up. I really do. I like Casey and Monica together. I like that immediately, like when she comes back late from the concert, it's not like a huge fight. It's like, no, we can't like just like do what we did before to get there. I like that character growth.
I love
So yeah,
Casey evolving a little bit too. Him
yeah,
being insightful enough to be like, "Can we not do this again? Can we just
yeah,
talk? Like,
yeah,
you got to tell me what's going on, right?" The whole field trip is awesome too. That's a real
yeah.
performer. MC Red Cloud is like one of the rappers that was there. I thought it was really compelling. If you're like listening to some of what he's saying, very, very good stuff. I don't know. That was even the beat.
I,
This is the moment that I
yeah.
wanted to talk about where like as we come in and we see the shirt that like the one woman is wearing, it's a hashtag of like why we wear red. It's a little bit charged that they present this, but it's also like such a fleeting instant, Grace. Like they barely show the shirt. I was curious if you were able to like read it as the students are reacting and the woman is like being standoffish. It's just again the inclusion of these things that are very antithetical to a lot of the idea of Yellowstone being some piece of like conservative propaganda. It's so not that. And the inclusion of like moments like this, I think, are important. Certainly, they are not the lion's share of the show, right? There are fewer and further in between between, but still, I think the inclusion of Monica and the persistence of like, this is not a storyline that we just drop. We are consistently, pretty much every episode, dropping in at some point to talk about like the dynamics of like a Native American people whose land was here for 10,000 years, as we have the Thomas like coming to the ranch moment, and like
Mhm.
the implication of that, and then the weight of like trying to find a place for yourself like in society in the modern day, given all that has been like taken from your people, and the kind of like what they've been subjected to in the last 2 centuries of the American experience. I thought it was really powerful little scene, and I love the way that it then like circles back for the emotional resonance of Casey. Like, can we talk? Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's figure this out.
Am I missing something about the why we wear red? Is it that am I missing something about, like, I know what that means. The why we wear red is the red initiative of like wearing red to
So when
acknowledge.
they first like come into the bar and Monica's got her students, one of the students has like a confrontation with the ticket with the women
Yes.
taking the tickets, and her
Yes.
shirt has that saying on it, and
Right.
he's like staring at it. He's like, "Oh," and she's like, "You got a problem, mother effer?" And he like kind of freaks out. I'm like, "Are we safe here?" So I
Right.
guess the point that I'm making, I'm rambling a little bit.
No,
They
that's okay.
show her shirt and they show him reacting to the shirt. It's the inclusion of the shirt, but it's a fleeting second. I mean, I think the
I,
shirt's on screen for like less than a full second. And the fact that like they included it, and then it feels to me like, I think it's ballsy of Taylor Sheridan to put that on the show, that moment of confrontation. But it's such a fleeting image that it feels a little bit like network notes of like, whoa, 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 too political, too political. Like you could spend more time on the murder, on the violence, but like you can't show that for very much longer. Nonetheless, like they showed it. It is there. It's on the screen.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know whether this is just like a Canadian thing. I think that actually, like, to a degree. So why we were red is basically acknowledging that many Indigenous women and girls are kidnapped and murdered,
Yes.
specifically because people know that they won't get caught by doing that. There will not be as many police resources. There'll not be as much attention put on a woman who goes missing. People will say, "Oh, she was, oh, she did leave the she was whatever." That people will dismiss it more than there's a thing that happened here in Canada. It's not exactly the same, but there was a serial killer who was killing gay men, and it was
Mhm.
not. He was mostly killing Arab and Muslim men, and it was not until a white man went missing that then there was actually resources put behind the thing. So the similar idea that why we wear red is to acknowledge that there's missing and murdered Indigenous women, and it's like actually like a huge issue.
It's a
Um,
massive problem, and it
it's a
has been for
massive problem.
decades too. As
Yeah.
somebody that, like, spent time there in the '90s, I mean, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I wondered whether or not the thing was like the way I read it was like that because she was staring at the shirt, like she thought maybe he was like looking at it like it was that her breasts, and then she's like, hey,
Yeah,
like, come on, and then he gets ready, and I do like because then he says like, are we in trouble here? Are we safe here? And she's like no, come on, like you're a fool. And I do think it's like a very progressive thing to see on the show, or more progressive, this idea that this is like kind of like white fragility of like I got like
oh, for
called out a
real.
little bit here in a moment, and now I'm like going to use the fact like, oh my god, am I actually like safe here
Yeah.
as this moment of like learning for him from Monica. So yeah, anyway, yeah,
I just thought it was a powerful moment. I love the inclusion of the scene. I love the inclusion of an artist that you get here, like MC Red Cloud. The fact that like the song is there, the shirt is shown. The shirt just struck me because like I had to pause it to actually read what it said, and I
right,
was like a little bit like, it's really bold of them to put it here, but it's also like it's so the safest possible way, where it's this fleeting like second. They barely even want to show it, but I think it's a really important note that like this kid being taken out of his comfort zone the tiniest way, and he's like the
right,
quintessential like white American Captain America
yeah,
type guy,
college kid,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure, yeah,
And so I thought it was a really like powerful little note, and I love the inclusion of ideas like this consistently across the show. Beth and Rip, I just want to talk about them a little bit. Like Rip kind of showing up to save the day, the whole like notion of like her. Am I like over indexing on this? He's like sleeping in the bed. He gets up to leave
no,
early, and he's like, I don't want to get used to this, right? Like they've clearly had this like on and off thing over the years. And like, he's afraid to get too attached. She's in this vulnerable position. She needs him right now. And he's like, I'm not going to pretend that this is like a thing that's going to happen. Is like the needle moving there? Are you tracking on this the way I'm tracking on it?
Yeah, I mean, this to me is like the best example of the show trying to tell like a very simple story. You talk about the idea that like Taylor Sheridan has talked about that a lot of like trying to just tell simple stories. This is pretty simple. This is like two people who have tried to be in a relationship. They clearly are like in some ways like perfect for each other, in other ways they drive each other wild and cause them each to do very stupid things.
They sure
And
drive
yet
each other wild.
they're like magnets. They're like both sides of the magnets where they like repel against each other, but then also are like attracted to each other, right? And so it's a very simple story, but I think it's like, it's effective. And the idea too, I do think it's like an interesting take here that like when Beth tries to stand up for Rip in the previous episode and is like, he's like your son. And John's like, well, he's not my son. But now there's this idea that like, if actually Beth and Rip could figure out how to work it together, like he kind of becomes like his family and he's like not his son still, but he's just like, he'd be a son-in-law, And so like that to me is like, it's like very simple. All of this stuff of like, he's on the outs, but he could be in, but they're like both toxic for each other, but also perfect for each other. I think it works for me. I like Rip and Beth together.
I find them very compelling as a pair. I think that he as a character is really interesting. We get the scene of him kind of like connecting with Tate and being cool uncle, where Casey gets pulled off with John, and I think there's something to like, look, Rip's not a good man. I don't want to like mince words here, right? Rip's like a dark MF, or he's done some really hard stuff. He comes from severe trauma. We get this clarity of he spent all his money burying his brother and his mom, and then took his dad's bones and discarded them out the window of the car between here and Nebraska. It's pretty touching, but I think that there's something endearing about the guy inside, right? The fact that he's like been through this much violence, he's lived such a jaded, cynical, kind of relentless life, but he's still got a capacity for love and for kindness, and he can be charming with the kid. I think it's really endearing. I think it's a kind of it's a Soprano-esque character note for these anti-hero characters. You and I have talked a lot about like mileage may vary for anti-heroes and the kind of current state of the world, and I don't know. I just like the heart of Rip that we see emerge here as he's going to like save Beth. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't so far, Grace? I feel
Keep
like
your hands off
most
Tate.
of the big points.
Keep your hands off Tate, and also security guard who died. Very, again, like we don't give out like. I'm very proud of us. So I'm just going to mention on every podcast where like Shannon Gus has the Chizzy points on the Crown podcast. We're giving out the Lizzie points, and I'm just very proud of that because Queen Elizabeth. We don't give them out. Honestly, there's a case to be made that like, this Beck plan is actually like very good. Killing the man on the security guard so that the like construction actually gets halted. It's very good plan. I feel like it's going to end up with them dying, but without being results oriented, it's not a bad.
They're
plan.
making strong moves. It's good strategy. It's good strategy. The other note, we talked about the Breaking Bad comparisons. I got to stop in to be like, this is the Jimmy Jesse Pinkman alternative reality arc, right? As Jimmy's going to show up at the meth cook and be like, this cook doesn't know what he's doing. And they take his belt buckle and his money. They're hassling him about Avery.
That's BS. The $1,000 for the thing. That's BS.
Jimmy almost looks like he's going to man up in the moment, which like good choice not to. When you're in a drug den and somebody's pointing a potentially loaded weapon at you, that is not the moment to like find your backbone, Jimmy. Like, good job handing over your rodeo belt buckle. But the whole like, I really had that beat of like, there is some resemblance between Aaron Paul and Jefferson.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Who plays Jimmy Hertram, and there's a very like, oh, you could have been Jesse Pinkman in another life, Jimmy. You could have been.
Yeah. So we get that, and but just I swear, very good line, extremely good line. Beth says that when she was young, she gave a hand job to this poor boy, and it sounds like it's going to be like the Beck brother is like the boy that got like you poor soul, I gave you. It's like, no, you looked a lot like the penis.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. The shit that Beth says to them as they confront her, like there is something so absolutely like powerful about Beth's confrontation with these two. And that's, I think, what makes it even more terrifying and chilling. And I think why it like becomes important to talk about violence against women in like that moment and what it depicts. But yeah, it's incredible. I mean, some of the lines that she has throughout that whole confrontation are just exceptional.
Yeah, it's very, very good. Yeah, that's about it. I don't think I got any. Yeah, there's a lot going on, but
They
we
were.
can talk
I
for
thought
so
these are two really good episodes. Episode 7 clearly like very highly rated, well received by the fans, but I thought 8 was like really exceptional. It does a really great job dealing with the fallout of 7 and setting up where we're going for the penultimate and the finale of season 2.
Mhm.
We will be back next week talking about both those episodes, Grace, and we'll see what happens from there. But until then, what do you got going on? Where can people find you?
Yeah, Jess and I are talking a full season of a TV show each week. This past week, we talked about A Nearly Normal Family, which is a Swedish Netflix
It's my
miniseries.
family. Yep.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, it's kind of like the Duds, A Nearly Normal Family. Talking Fargo, talking The Crown, talking movies week with Ariel, and The Curse, which is a delightfully weird show. Talking through that with Dr. Amanda. So yeah, lots going on here on Post Your Recaps as we wrap up the end of the year. I'm on social media at High from Grace. What about you, Philly?
Cool, cool. I'm at DM Philly in all the places. You can go find me. You can hit me up on Discord, on Twitter. Go follow me on YouTube, on Twitch. I haven't been doing a lot the last couple of months, but as we're rolling into winter, I'm looking to ramp up. Talking about Burroughs End with Melissa Woodward. We finished talking about Tales from the Loop weeks and weeks ago, but I will still keep telling people to go scope out that show. Just keeping myself busy as the year is winding down. We'll be back next week talking about the penultimate episode and finale of Yellowstone season 2. But until then, just remember when somebody says hardy har har, they really don't think you're funny. They're being sarcastic.